Prime Minister urges firms to strive for $10 billion in bilateral trade with Russia by 2020. Prospects of the TPP trade deal on Vietnam-US relations. Hello, it's good to have you back here on BizLine, brought to you by VTV International. My name is Dai Chang, and first we'll start our show today by taking a quick look at the headlines from the past week. Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc asked Vietnamese and Russian firms to raise two-way trade to $10 billion by 2020 during a business forum held in Moscow on Wednesday. Reviewing bilateral ties in his speech, the Prime Minister said Russia ranks 17th out of 112 countries and territories investing in Vietnam, with a total value worth $2.08 billion, mostly in the fields of energy, mining, machinery, engineering, and tourism. Vietnam has invested in 20 projects capitalized at $2.93 billion in Russia, focusing on oil, gas, and services, among others. Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc asked business circles to analyze obstacles to trade and propose policies conducive to business cooperation on the back of the signed Vietnam-Eurasian Economic Union Free Trade Agreement. To shore up tourism links, he suggested increasing the frequency of flights between the two countries and promoting investment in these fields. Vietnam could reach upper middle income status, meaning $22,000 purchasing power parity per capita by 2035 by growing with sustainability, equity, and social inclusion, and being a capable and accountable state, a World Bank official has said. Victoria Kwok, Vice President for World Bank's East Asia and Pacific region, cited the key opportunities outlined in the World Bank's Vietnam 2035 report, which includes trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Vietnam-EU Free Trade Agreement. In order to better tap the country's upcoming opportunities, an immediate priority should be given to boosting productivity of the domestic private sector by strengthening micro-institutions of the market economy and competition policy and its enforcement. A commercial approach to state ownership should also be adopted. The General Department of Vietnam Customs reports that Vietnam recorded a trade surplus of $1.76 billion in the first 4 months of this year. By the end of April, total export turnover reached $53.1 billion, up 6.5% compared to the same period last year. Meanwhile, imports reached $51.34 billion, down 1.3%. South Korea has announced that the country will reopen its labor market to Vietnamese migrant workers in 2017. Local businessmen have praised workers from Vietnam for their ability to adapt to local working conditions and acquire job-related skills very quickly. The South Korean Labor Ministry said that it took the step of lifting the ban after Vietnam drew up a 2016-2018 roadmap that aims to better regulate attempted overstays. A memorandum of understanding on the resumption of Vietnamese migrant workers will be soon reached. In 2012, Seoul stopped allowing Vietnamese nationals the right to work in the country after a large number of stayed after the expiry of their visas. Banking 2016, held jointly by the State Bank of Vietnam and the International Data Group, kicked off on Thursday in Hanoi with the aim of introducing new banking technologies. The event features an expo and a series of technical workshops on innovations in banking information infrastructure and distribution channels. 30 booths from both national and international tech firms attended the event to showcase state-of-the-art technology in finance and banking. The event is expected to link domestic banks with technology firms from both home and abroad. The Ho Chi Minh City Startup Investment and Innovation Fund was launched on Tuesday to support business startups by youths. Founded by the Vietnam Youth Federation in Ho Chi Minh City in collaboration with Ho Chi Minh City Finance and Investment State-Owned Company and the Saigon Hanoi Commercial Joint Stock Bank or HSB, the fund has an initial capital of 30 billion Vietnamese dong or $1.34 million. The fund will mobilize funds from investors, enterprises, and individuals to raise the capital to $100 billion or almost $4.5 million by 2020. The fund will directly invest in startups registered and operating in the city and with at least one owner aged under 35. The fund will invest in businesses in all sectors, but it encourages technology-oriented businesses whose products have applications in mobile telephony, the internet, agriculture, and other key economic sectors. We have just reviewed some economic highlights from the past week. Up next, we'll talk about prospects of the TPP trade deal on Vietnam-U.S. relations in our crosstalk. The United States President Barack Obama is scheduled to visit Vietnam between May the 23rd to the 25th, his first visit to the nation during his 2 terms as U.S. President. The visit is believed to aim at strengthening bilateral relations in numerous fields, including economics. Especially as both nations are members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, set to be ratified later this year. The visit is expected to create a momentum for trade facilitation for Vietnam and the U.S. And in this week's edition of Crosstalk, our reporter Hoàng Hằng sat down and talked with Mr. Adam Sitkoff, Executive Director of the American Chamber of Commerce, AmCham, in Vietnam, about the opportunities the TPP holds for both countries. But before that, let's take a look at the following clip.
Today, I am announcing the normalization of diplomatic relationships with Vietnam.
On July the 11th, 1995, diplomatic ties between Vietnam and the U.S. were normalized. However, trade relations between the two countries were restored 1 year before when the then U.S. President Bill Clinton lifted the trade embargo in 1994. Since then, trade ties between the two nations have gone from strength to strength through numerous high-level visits by leaders of both nations. President Obama's visit is the 3rd visit by 3 consecutive U.S. presidents to Vietnam, following the historic visit to the U.S. by Party General Secretary Nguyễn Phú Trọng in 2015. Vietnam and the United States are both signatories to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, agreement, along with 10 other Pacific Rim nations. The TPP was officially signed in Auckland, New Zealand on February of this year, and it's expected to further facilitate trade between Vietnam and the U.S.
Thank you for joining our BizLine edition about Vietnam-U.S. trade prospects. Now, Vietnam is a significant player in President Barack Obama's pivot to Asia. Both the economic and the political relationship between the two nations is at its warmest 40 years after the war ended, and both are members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, how do you think the trade deal will impact the Vietnam-U.S. trade relations?
Well, we think that the TPP is very significant, not only for businesses, but it's very significant for the overall U.S.-Vietnam bilateral relationship. There's only 12 countries in TPP, and even though it covers 40% of economic activity in the world, when we look around at the countries, we see that Vietnam is the country that has the most to benefit. I think that the Vietnamese government knows that, the American government knows that. We expect that that TPP is it's going to get done, ratified by these countries, and it's going to come into an effect, and it's going to be very useful for Vietnam, and it's just going to help drive the relationship between U.S. and Vietnam forward.
For the past 2 decades, the Vietnam-U.S. trade have come a long way. Now, do you think the trade pact will create a momentum for trade activities between the two nations? And which sectors do we expect to see a rise in trade?
When we look back, just 20 years ago. U.S.-Vietnam trade was only about $500 million. Okay, it's over $45 billion now. So that's a straight upward line, and it's been very impressive. We think that TPP is the next step in that relationship. TPP is going to help Vietnam's economy. It's going to create opportunities. It's going to grow the supply chain base here. It's going to make Vietnam a better place to do business. And because of that, we expect great opportunities between the U.S. and Vietnam. And I know that American companies are really looking forward to Vietnam being in TPP and for the effects it's going to have on doing business here. The United States, when it looks at Vietnam, it looks across a broad spectrum of the economy. We have American companies here that are, selling lipstick and potato chips and cars and educational services and helping develop Vietnam's tourism industry by building beach resorts and buildings, and it's really across the whole spectrum of activities here. So some people look at the numbers and they say, well, clothes and shoes. And actually, U.S. business and investment in Vietnam is about the whole range of the economy here. At AmCham, our members, a lot of whom have been here for over 20 years, have a real commitment and a long-term commitment to Vietnam, its economy, and its young people. So, the United States business community is here to stay, here to partner with Vietnam, and we think TPP brings a lot of opportunities in a lot of the sectors I just named.
Vietnam posted a high tariff reduction rates for products of interest to the U.S. since the country joined the WTO in 2007. In your opinion, what has been the notable trend in trade, and how does the TPP impact this trend?
Well, I think for Vietnam, the trend's been fantastic. If we look back right before WTO, Vietnam was exporting around $10 billion a year to the U.S. Now it is $38 billion. So that's almost 400% growth. And a lot of that was because of better market access. You get lower tariffs, you can sell more. Vietnam becomes a better place to manufacture and export. But it's not only about tariffs and exporting. It's about creating the type of rules and business environment where people are going to feel safer and more confident to bring investment into Vietnam. I remember a few years back, there were a lot of people that were in Vietnam that were questioning whether WTO was good or not. And it's not just in Vietnam. We can look at my own country, in the United States. Trade is hard. Trade agreements are often unpopular because you have to give up something to get something. And there's no such thing as everyone winning. And that's the thing that makes people uncomfortable or unhappy. Whereas Vietnam has integrated into the global trade community and has signed all these trade agreements and treaties, it's got to give up some things. That's just a fact of life. And overall, what we look at is, for the 92 million Vietnamese people here, is life better now than it was 10 years ago? Is life better now than it was 20 years ago? And what type of opportunities for Vietnam's young people are things like TPP going to bring? So as Vietnam integrates into the world trading community, ultimately Vietnamese people win.
Figures from the U.S. Census Bureau show that Vietnam has consistently enjoyed a trade surplus with the United States since 1997. Bilateral trade turnover in 2015 hit $45 billion, in which Vietnam exported roughly $38 billion in goods to the U.S. The U.S. became Vietnam's largest export market. Some experts predicted that Vietnam's export would increase 28.4% when the TPP come into force. Its export value with the TPP in 2025 is projected at $307 billion, while the figure without a trade pact is projected at only $239 billion. Meanwhile, the deal will create great opportunities for the U.S. by eliminating more than 18,000 tariffs on U.S.-made products sold overseas and in Vietnam.
According to statistics from the U.S. Census Bureau, Vietnam has continuously recorded a trade surplus with the U.S. since 1997. Now, where is the room to grow for Vietnamese export to the U.S. after the TPP takes effect?
As we look at the great growth in U.S.-Vietnam trade numbers, we often see that it's Vietnam exporting more and more things to the United States. In fact, of all the countries that Vietnam trades with, the United States buys more of what Vietnam makes than any other country does in the world. And I expect that to continue. Vietnamese companies are very competitive. There are a lot of things people can make here and export to the United States, and we see there's great areas for growth. And on the other side, something that I also work on is helping get American investment and American exports to come to Vietnam. You know, in the United States, only 2 to 3% of companies export anywhere outside the borders of the United States. And the vast majority of that's just going to Canada and Mexico because it's right nearby. So one thing we try to do in America is let people know that, you know, 95% of the world's consumers live outside the US. That in places like Vietnam, with 92 million people with a median age of only 29, there's going to be great opportunity here no matter what kind of thing that you're making. And so we try to get more American investors to look at Vietnam, more American companies to export to Vietnam, and we already know that there's wonderful opportunities for Vietnamese companies to sell to the United States. I expect both to continue.
Among the goods and services that U.S. companies are exporting to Vietnam, which area do you think hold a great potential for growth in the future?
The things that the U.S. is good at, which increasingly are things which require knowledge or intellectual property. You know, American IT firms and software and apps and other types of things that use the internet Vietnam represents a great area of growth for that. We already see in Vietnam a young population that is online all the time on their phones. Vietnamese people here, they want to buy things online, they want to do things online. People are comfortable being online here, and that's a great opportunity for American companies. I think that I'd venture to say that almost everyone that you know uses Facebook, and things like that are going to continue to grow because there's great opportunity here.
The agreement, described as a new generation trade deal, encompasses 40% of the global economy and accounts for $300 billion of the world's GDP every year. So what do experts have to say about the implications of the TPP on Vietnam-US economic ties?
Vietnam has the most to gain from TPP. I think in terms of opening up further the TPP countries' markets for textiles and apparel, for light manufacturers, for technology products, for agriculture. These are all areas where Vietnam is extremely strong.
While Vietnam is embracing more high-tech export commodities like computers and phones, the country still relies largely on traditional exports such as apparel. In fact, textile and garment exports made up 1/3 of all Vietnamese exports to the U.S. in 2014, raking in nearly $10 billion in revenue. Vietnam is now the second biggest apparel supplier to the U.S., accounting for a 10% market share.
Theo dự báo, nếu khai thác tốt thị trường Mỹ thì đến năm 2020, Việt Nam có khả năng xuất khẩu tới 20 tỷ đô la vào thị trường Mỹ từ con số 10 tỷ đô la của 2014, tiếp tục duy trì cái đà tăng trưởng hai con số và quan trọng hơn là chiếm một thị phần lên tới xấp xỉ 20% tại thị trường Mỹ.
Quality products are another export staple to the U.S., earning over $1.7 billion last year. As the U.S. continues to import over 80% of its total seafood consumption, Vietnam can expect growth in this market in the long run, despite frequent anti-dumping investigations against Vietnamese shrimp and catfish.
Cùng với lại các cái cơ chế về ngoại giao, các cái cơ chế về gọi là luật lệ về thương mại thông thường và các cái cơ chế mà doanh nghiệp chúng ta đã có được, thì hoàn toàn tôi tin rằng là những thách thức đó cũng không phải là quá khó để chúng ta có thể vượt qua.
From a long-term point of view, Vietnamese producers and exporters can benefit from the strict criteria the U.S. sets, since they force Vietnamese goods to be better in quality while still relatively competitive in price. Furthermore, the TPP agreement could further lay out strict standards regarding labor rights, environmental protection, and transparency that all member countries need to adhere to.
What are the barriers for the Vietnam-U.S. trade ties at the moment?
Well, we see a lot of barriers that still exist. You know, we want the government to make rules that enable and facilitate business rather than restrict and dampen down business. We think that's very important. Vietnam has lots of laws, lots of rules, just like other countries. We need to see those laws enforced and enforced fairly. We want to see reform of the state-owned enterprise system in Vietnam. It's the Vietnamese private sector that has the hardest time getting credit from the bank that they need to extend their business. They have a hard time competing for access for, you know, land and contracts and other things. So we want to see a set of rules that's evenly enforced by people, that facilitates business rather than restricts business, and where people can feel confident here that Vietnam's a good place to do business.
And will the Trans-Pacific Partnership have an effect on the government economic policy?
TPP requires a lot of changes in Vietnamese law, and one of the things that we're looking forward to is for the National Assembly to ratify TPP, because that's when the changes in law can start happening here, and it's very important for Vietnam. For people to want to do business here, the business climate needs to be good here, and the business climate will be good here if we've got a strong, solid foundation of rule of law with contract sanctity, where things like intellectual property is protected. You know, most of the things that organizations like AmCham and others care about are things that Vietnamese people also care about. Recently, the Prime Minister Phuc, one of the first things he did in office was he met with the business community. We're very pleased that he did that so early after taking office, because we know he's very busy right now. But what we see at a meeting like that is Vietnamese businesses and foreign businesses, we roughly want the same things. You know, people want certainty so that they can plan for their business. They want to know what wage rates are going to be and tax rates are going to be, and that knowing that that the government is on their side. And that's why our organization, AmCham, works with our partners in the government to create a better business climate here. We want to be an advocate for Vietnam, but for having a good environment, because we're trying to attract more people to come here.
Once it takes effect, the TPP will create the world's largest trade zone. It is expected to write the rules for the global trade. However, this puts great pressure on member countries to quickly carry out institutional reforms and make the best of the partnership.
We have assistance programs right now that are working with various ministries to support TPP-related reforms. And as we get closer to ratification, we expect to be increasing those programs to help Vietnam in the areas it wants help get ready for implementing its commitments, and also helping the small and medium enterprises, for example, prepare for an environment where there's more competition as well as more opportunity.
Each TPP country has its own procedures to obtain approval, law enforcement, and reforms to adhere to the TPP's commitments. As the U.S. is heading for an election at the end of this year, the chance for the successful adoption of the TPP is still up in the air.
TPP is still a promise. It's not a reality yet, especially when the U.S. is heading for election at the end of this year, with the presidential candidates having different opinions about this trade pact. What are the risks for Vietnam if the accord fails?
I don't like to think that it could fail. To me, the risk is that the trade pact is delayed. I don't believe in the failure of it. We have 12 countries that have just spent 5 years working out a lot of details and making a lot of sacrifice. And because all 12 countries are going to benefit, this needs to go forward. TPP is going to happen. You know, the question is, when is it going to happen? And I wish I could answer that. I don't have a special answer. I could tell you that President Obama would like to see this get done before he leaves office. I agree with that. I'd like to see it done before he leaves office too, because there's no time to waste in a competitive world. If there are advantages for Vietnam, if there are advantages for the United States, I'd like to see these advantages happen sooner rather than later. There are a lot of people that look very negatively negatively about trade. They feel that it's why they don't have the type of job they expect. They think that it's the reason that they haven't gotten a raise in their job in 10 or 15 years. So they tend to think that trade means that some guy in Vietnam is stealing their job. They don't realize that, great things can be, that they're getting a much better deal on things, and that the world is a globalized place. Secretary of State Kerry gave a speech recently where he argued that we're already in a borderless world, that we're in a globalized world. I know that President Obama agrees also. One of the things he's going to talk about in his upcoming visit here really is how the United States and Vietnam are partners intertwined together. That young people in Vietnam want the same things as young people do in the United States, and we see TPP as helping move that forward. So I can't guess what month TPP is going to get done, but I can tell you it is going to get done because it's beneficial to the people of the United States, and it might take a little while. And again, I hope it gets done as quickly as possible. And we encourage countries like Vietnam and others in TPP to keep moving their processes forward. There's no reason to wait until day one of TPP to start changing things that are going to help you anyway. We would say to do that now. And so I expect it to get done. I think TPP is not only going to help Vietnam, but it's going to help the United States too.
Now let's look at this from a wider context. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is not the only trade agreement that Vietnam joined in recent years. In your opinion, how will the dynamics of the Vietnam-US trade relations change, taking into account all the impacts from other free trade agreements, such as the Vietnam-Korea Free Trade Agreement and the EVFTA?
We constantly tell people in the United States government that the reason we need TPP is that the world is moving forward in signing trade agreements. As you just mentioned, Vietnam has signed a bunch of them. So far the United States only has 3 trade agreements with Asian countries. It's nothing, and they're out of 200 and something that have been done. If without TPP, the United States is not going to be able to play as it should in Asia. That's why we need that to get done. So we see for U.S.-Vietnam economic relations to really reach its full potential, we need this trade agreement. Our business community, we're pleased that Vietnam and Korea have signed a trade agreement, that Vietnam and the EU have signed a trade agreement. We're pleased that countries are trying to take the RCEP agreement seriously and trying to see what benefits can happen there. Because all of these, in bits and pieces, they're not equal, but they're about facilitating business. They're about lowering barriers to market access. They're about making sure people play by a better set of rules. And so TPP is obviously at a standard very high compared to these others, and that's why we're so happy that Vietnam is in the agreement. But trade's going to keep moving forward. There's a lot of opportunity that comes from having a country that's open to the rest of the world and where people feel comfortable bringing their money here. That's when Vietnam wins. And so I support these other trade agreements. At the same time, I don't want TPP, I need TPP. And we spend a lot of time explaining that, and we're going to reiterate that during the President's visit here.
Thank you for joining our program.
Come on.
Initiated by a group of countries sharing the same view and goal of expanding agreements that include Asian Pacific countries, the TPP is expected to create a boost for U.S.-Vietnam economic ties and provide wider market access for both sides. Hopefully, with upcoming expansion opportunities, Vietnamese companies can access and further develop trade and cooperation ties with U.S. investors and businesses. Through our program, we hope you have gained some insights into the opportunities lying ahead of American and Vietnamese businesses. And that's all we have for this edition of BizLine. Thank you so much for joining us. You can rewatch our programs online at vtv4.vn or our YouTube channel at vtv4go. Many thanks for being here with us. Goodbye for now.